In this tutorial, we're going to look at creating a turntable in Maya. Now, this can be done in other pieces of software, notably something like Marmoset Toolbag, which is a fantastic piece of software. But if you don't have access to that, then you can do this kind of thing in Maya as well. It just takes a little bit longer, a little bit more work. So, something like this. Okay, and this can be used for showreel work. It can be used to show off work that you might have done for your academic studies. So let's get into this and have a look at it. So this is a scene already set up in Maya. You can see here that we get the same kind of thing. So what I will do is I'm just going to do a new scene. Just save this, continue, make a completely blank scene. I'm just going to just working on my other monitor to find my, bear with me, just find my files. Here we go, just drag and drop this in. So this is my FBX file that I created already in Maya. I'll do is just to make it a bit easier, just drag this up just above the grid. I don't want it sitting on the grid, so that'll be fine there. And then I'm going to apply the textures to this. So the textures have been done in Substance Painter. Just going to bring them in, and I'm using Maya 2018 here. So we're using Arnold, which is quite easy to get the PBR textures in. So let's right click over the model. Let's assign a new material, and under the Arnold shader, I'm going to bring the standard surface in. Now I have already done a tutorial on this, so I'm not going to go too much into this. I'm just going to plug in the textures. So these are exported out, by the way, as a PBR metal rough. So let's bring these in. Let's make sure I'm going to the right folder. I have set up a project on this as well. So actually let's go models, where are we? Models, but my textures, and in here I have now these have already been converted. It will convert it to what's called a TX file. I'm just trying to make sure I get my base color. There we are. It's PNGs. Okay. Press 6 to bring up the texture. Let's just go back. Bring my metalness in. I'll bring all these in first of all, and then I will adjust them. So metallic. Let's bring in my roughness. And my normal map. So normal going into the geometry, spot map. Make sure we bring a file. Make sure we switch it over to tangent space normals. Then my bat normal. Okay. So I'm just going to go in and change a couple of things on this in terms of the settings. Just under my normal, I'm just going to back up one step. This is a tangent space normal. Just going to make sure that I'm unchecking the flip red channel. I'm going to leave the flip green channel switched on. Using a PBR metal rough as an Unreal template. So within Maya we need to flip those normals at green channel. Excuse me. Go back up. I want to go into each of these textures. So let's start off with the color. So anywhere where I've got this node on there. So the color actually I'm going to leave as sRGB. But I do want to change the others. So in the metalness, go into this. I want to change this to be raw. And again, as I say, I'm not going into too much detail here. Roughness. Let's just set this to raw. I want to interpret the files correctly because the sRGB is introducing kind of like a gamma compression on that. We want them without that. I want to go in, just make sure my normal is the same as well. Let's go in here, make sure this is raw. Okay. So if I go into Arnold now, just go to the render view on this, and let's just click on play. We're going to get nothing at all because we need to introduce some lights to this. Now I'm going to create a basic light system. I'm just going to use, if I go into Arnold again, into the lights, I'm just going to use this light, SkyDome light here. So what this is going to do is create a SkyDome the whole way around our model. You can see it's just a sphere on there with a default white material on this. But again, if I go into my render view, click on play again, you can see now we have that in there, and we have our model being able to be seen. So to emulate what things like Substance Painter and Marmoset Toolbag do, I'm going to plug an HDR image into this, a high dynamic range image. This can't be any old image. It has to be a .hdr or any XR format. It has to have that high dynamic range to create a lighting environment on this. So my color, I'm just going to go click on the input node. I'm going to choose a file on this, and it's going to browse. Now I have some HDRs already. You can get some free from online if you have a search around. So let's go in HDR. You can use the kitchen probe. Now this isn't a perfect one because it's a free one. We do get this outline around it, but for the purpose of this, it's absolutely fine. So I'm just going to open this. If I again just go into Arnold, do a render view. Now what it's going to do is it's going to really blow this out, and this again is because we're adding an sRGB compression on this, or a gamma on this as a color correction, which we don't want at all. So let's make sure we go into our color space and change this from sRGB again into a raw file. And once I get this, again something more like what we want. Okay, let's bring that down. So one thing I don't want on this, let's bring this up again actually, I don't want this background in here. I want a plain background for my renders. So what I'm going to do, just minimize this again, is I'm going to switch this off. So within my SkyDome, so I've just got the outliner open here, within my SkyDome, I'm just going to go in on my SkyDome light. Actually, my SkyDome light shape. And I want to find this visibility drop down. Within the camera, I'm just going to go in here and set this to 0. And what that will do, it's already open. And we'll switch that off and just give this a plain background. Now the background color here may be set by this value, but we actually need to change that, but I'll do that on the camera in a little bit. Just note that we will need to do that. So I'll just close this down for a second. So although we can still see the HDR image here, it's blanked out from the camera. Okay, so if you were doing a still render, that would be fine. We could leave that at that. What I will do on here, again, let's just bring this up, is I will enable shadows to be cast. So right now this has got nothing to cast shadows onto. So what I'll do is I'll just create a plane object on here. It's going to go into the channel box in my polyplane. We don't need that amount of segments. I'll take this up to a little bit larger. Just switch this grid off. Just show my render frame on here. It's by using the cropping options of film gate and the resolution gate on that. And again, let's go in on this. Now I need to up the quality, but what you are seeing here is we are getting some shadows, and the shadows are also created by the HDR image. If you did want to create more dense shadows, deeper shadows in there, you could go in and create another Arnold light, maybe something like an area light. I don't want to drag them there. But for this, I'm going to use my HDR image to do this. Okay, just for now. So that's that set up, but I don't actually want that to show. I want to be able to see my background in this. So this plane, essentially I want to be invisible, but I want it to capture the shadows. So to do that, I'm just going to click on the plane itself. If you can't select it there, just select it here. Right click, I'm going to do a new material on this. And again, within the Arnold shader, we have this material called Shadow Matte. Click on this. Just bring my render view over, and you can see I still have the shadows cast here, but I don't have that plane showing. So that the shadow matte will just be there to capture the shadows, but essentially be invisible to the camera. Okay. So now I'm going to create a turntable on this. I'm going to make a camera go around this. So there's a really easy way to do this in Maya. Just make sure I go into the animation module on this, and under visualize we have this create turntable. So I'm working 24 frames a second, by the way. Here, if you go into your settings, just make sure I've got my playback speed at 24 frames per second times 1, so it's real time. So I'm going to go into visualize, I'm going to create a turntable, go into the options, and basically all you need to do here is put in a time. So I've got this at 192, which is a decent amount of frames to be able to show the entire 360 of your model without it being too quick. So I'll just leave it at that for now. My direction is clockwise, and I'm just going to click apply. And it doesn't seem to have done anything, but it has done. If I click the play button now, we now have this 360 in here. Okay. So this camera's going around this view, around the model. I could also simply have the model turning depending on what I want, if I want to show the different environment. Couple of ways to do this. This is just one of them. But the create turntable is a quick way of doing this. Okay. What this is actually doing is creating a group, and it's creating a camera within the group. If I come to do a quick render of this, I'm just going to render the current frame just in my render settings up here. Now note the background color. So when we're looking at this in the Arnold render, that was grey. We can set the background color in the Arnold render. But within Maya, we need to do something a bit different on this. So what I want to do is I want to go into the settings for my renderer. Click in here. I'm going to go into the Arnold renderer, and under environment, we have this background, which is a legacy option on this. But what I can do is I can go into the input node on this and use this create ray switch shader. Just click on there. This comes up with the options for this, and all I need to do in the camera one is start bringing this color to whatever I want this to be. If I render again, there we get something like that. Okay. I'm just going to click my check my color management. So this should be set, but just to show you where this is, if I go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and then the Preferences, I just want to go into my color management, make sure that this is enabled. And for our color transform preferences, we want the rendering space to be a linear sRGB. For the view transform, we want this to be an sRGB gamma. So just make sure your color management is those settings. Let's click on Save. Okay. So now we have our turntable. This does have a little bit of ease in and ease out on it as well. So depending what you want, you may want to change that. Let's make sure I change my playback frames there so we can see the whole thing. Okay. So really the final thing that we just need to do is go in and up the quality of this. So I'm just going to go into my render view again. Let's bring this over. I'm going to set a couple of things in here. So I'm going to go back into the settings. The first thing I'll do is just go to the Common tab. Just set a few things up in here. So in terms of my output format, I'm going to set my image format to be maybe a PNG. So this is 16. I'm going to go in and leave this color space as, I would leave that raw. My frame animation extension going to be named extension single frame. I don't want that. I want this to be name.hash.extension, which will be our frame number, then our extension out of that. I'm only working up to 192 frames, so I'll leave my frame padding at 3, which will just mean when it starts out, it'll be 001, 002, etc. My start, my frame range, my start frame and end frame, I need to change my end frame to be 192, or the length of whatever you set the timetable to be, by 1 frame every time. I do have renderable cameras here, so I've got the perspective camera, which is a base one that Maya starts with, and we have the one that was created via the turntable. I could go in and actually get rid of this camera on there. So we just have our turntable camera. And then finally under here we have the image presets. I can just set this to the output size. So just for the sake of this, I'm going to do this 720, but you could do it at 1080. Okay, and our Arnold render view is just going to jump in, and this is the size that this is now at. So this is the real size we're working with. I also need to go in and set the quality of this. So I just need to go into the Arnold renderer, and we have a couple of settings here for the quality of this. Now, a couple of these I can switch down. So there's not any particular, there's no glass on this, so there's no ray tracing or refraction on this. So I'm going to switch off this transmission, which is more to do with refraction. I also haven't got any subsurface shading, any skin or wax or anything like that, so I can take this completely off. And what I'm going to do is bring this diffuse up. I mean, a specular, like our specular reflections on this are anti-aliasing. This is sort of the main one. This is a key one. So I'm going to bring the quality of this up. Maybe about 6 to 8. 8 is pretty decent quality. You see this is now chugging away in the background. Diffuse is actually the diffuse quality, the overall quality of this. Essentially what happens with all of these, by the way, is these get cubed. So this is actually 6 times 6 to get 36. So our sample, it tells you all the values up here. So the bigger this final number is, which is the calculation of all of these together, and the better the render, but the more the render time. So it's a balance between these. So I might just take the diffuse render up a little bit. Maybe bring the specular render up a little bit. This has got some specularity, pardon me, on there. So for the purpose of this, that should be fine. You can always up this some more if you feel like you need more quality on that. But that's okay. So I'm going to close this down. Close this down. And then we're really ready to render out. In terms of this, you are better doing a set project. And again, I've done a tutorial on this for actually going into project management. Because what this is going to do is going to set an images folder, if there's not already one in there, and then it's going to put the rendered images, because this is a render sequence, it's a series of images, it's not an AVI or a MOV or anything. So it's going to put those individual images into that folder and render out. Okay. One thing I may also want to do, if I just save this scene as the scene, for the sake of this, I'll call it BAT 360 tut. Save. Just go back into the render settings. What we can do in the Common tab as well is just set the file name prefix. I can actually go in and right click on this, and there are a set of things we can actually put on this. I'm just going to do the insert scene name. So basically it's going to take whatever my scene's called and use this as a file name for this as well. So in this case it would be bat360tut, and then for our settings down here it would put the number on. So bat360 tut.001.png, etc, etc. So I could close that. So when it comes to render this, I can go to the rendering menu, rendering module. Under my render settings, I'm new in Maya 2018-17 perhaps, when Arnold came into this. We do have this render sequence. If you do a batch render, which is actually a better way to do it because it renders in the background, this is an academic version of, or an educational license of Maya, and what that will do is put a watermark on it. If you want your renders without watermarks, then you'll have to do a render sequence. So I can go in here to make sure the current camera is our turntable camera. We can set an alternate output file location as well if we wanted to, otherwise it will just render into the folder that I was saying about. And then we can just click on render sequence and away it will go. Okay, so if I just say click on this, and then we'll do our first frame. Etc, etc. So what I'll do is I'm just going to press escape for now, just to cancel this out, not sit through all that render. Okay. But that's basically all the setup to create this 360 render of your object. In the next tutorial, what I'll do is look at actually bringing this into Premiere and exporting that out. It's a very quick thing, but I'll leave this here for now.